This is day 2 of the July-August 7-day retreat at Springwater, 1991. Most of the time, the topics for the talks come from questions or comments that people make during meetings, which I jot down. Usually there's not enough time between 2 meetings. I may do it later. And in any case, I do not remember verbatim which way the question was put. So I just jot down what I remember. It also happens frequently that many people or several people ask the same question. So what is jotted down is maybe a composite of the different similar questions. So if you don't recognize your own question verbatim, it's not that you were not understood at the time. Also, if you're asking a question in a private meeting that you wish not to be brought up in a talk, then please mention that to me and I will not bring it up. People, except for 1 or 2 times that this request was made not to bring up a question, people have felt that it is helpful to hear many other people's questions. I think that's also why group meetings are popular, to hear that one is not alone with one's concern, that others also have concerns or often very similar concerns and problems and questions. Or sometimes someone will say, I don't have any question, but hearing questions that people like myself have helps in looking at something in myself which I hadn't verbalized before. If you have a question that you wish to be read verbatim, then please write it down for me. That's a big help. I don't have to take the time to remember it and to write it down. Not all the questions, of course, have been written down, and I cannot say that I write them down in order of importance. It's what is remembered. Sometimes an important question may not be remembered. So don't evaluate yourself according to whether your question is brought up or not. Or if this evaluation is in fact going on, then can you see it and not put stock into it? Because it may not be accurate. So here are some of the questions. This is for 2 days or 1.5 days of meetings. Can you say more about questioning and how it is related to observing? You talk so much about seeing, but is that the same as observing? My child has recently been very concerned with fear of death and dying. How do I approach this? I am feeling a lot of fear about a recent decision I have made. What does it mean to question it or to be with it? Does it mean being with the thoughts? I have wanted to come to this quiet place, and what I find is a heightened sensitivity to fear of sickness and death, of which I see so much around me. At times when I'm attentive to the striving for completion or for wholeness, that striving abates. But it always seems to be there underneath this attention, because it comes back and takes over again. When the attention is gone, the striving for something takes over again. When I'm walking on the path, even though I see the trees and hear the footsteps and the birds, there is still this feeling that there is a me walking, and that the trees and everything else is passing by me. The awareness you talk about seems to be a very solitary thing. What place does awareness have in relationship? In being here initially, I felt depressed by all the rules and by the silence, and the fear of making a noise, doing something wrong, like closing doors too loudly. Since then, I'm realizing that I am putting a lot of this pressure on myself. And this realization has been relaxing. No, causing a relaxation, that's what was meant, of this fear of doing wrong. One of the current principles in mental health is that if I am feeling good about myself, I can take hurt or criticism from others. Getting over it quickly, something like that, if I feel good about myself. But now I'm beginning to wonder about this whole thing of feeling good about myself. What is this self to feel good about? And if we're identified with ourselves, don't we get hurt anyways? In observation, is there inevitably self-critical judgment or self-centered judgment? I am finding that freedom is there when you don't have to go with an old habit, but can choose to do something else. In sitting, I am observing my thoughts as objectively as possible. Is that enough? Clearly, we cannot enter into all of these questions, but maybe the questions will somehow enter into the talk. Maybe we'll start with the first one, which was can you say more about questioning and how it is related to observing? You talk so much about seeing, but is that the same as observing? Which includes the question, is observing inevitably self-centered and judgmental? And observing my thoughts, is that enough? How is questioning related to observing? Observing here including listening, looking, feeling. the openness of the senses. How is questioning related to that? In sitting here together, if we were to ask right now, what are really all the sounds of this moment? We're wondering, what are all the sounds of this moment, inwardly and outwardly? Or let's just say the sounds, let's leave the all out. What are the sounds of this moment, inwardly and outwardly? We're asking the question because we're interested. Wouldn't we have to begin instantly to listen, to observe, to feel, to look, to open up to what's there? Or as we were asking yesterday, what is happening this moment? The question is being put by someone or by this mind that wants to understand, begin to understand what is happening this moment. It is asking, what is happening? Doesn't it have to listen, to look, to feel openly, without already having all kinds of ideas about it? You cannot listen to the wind if you expect or want quietness. Then there's already an attitude toward the wind and a distortion of the sound, because the mind is preoccupied with what it wants to hear or wants to be, which is this self-centered listening or observing out of what I want this moment to be or to happen. And then the imagination or idea of what I want, and we can imagine things very vividly with all the body involved in this imagination of what we want to be or to happen. That interferes with openly, non-involvedly listening to what is actually going on. Can one listen for a moment without expecting anything, wanting something, or not wanting something? Just open to what is there, because we're wondering what is really there beside all the million thoughts. So, does one see the relationship between questioning and observing or listening quietly, non-judgmentally? And does one see the relationship between wanting or expecting something and the distorted listening, the distorted looking? Not to accept this. One has to find this out for oneself. That if one expects something, one is not open to receive what is there, to hear it, to see it objectively, as somebody said. My wants and my fears and expectations interfere with a clear, simple perception. Don't jot it down as a mental health principle, but find out whether it's so, whether it's the truth. If you wonder, is it really so, then that question will be related to observing and listening on your own. If If I want to hear praise of myself in a talk, praise of what I'm believing in or what I'm attached to, if I am expecting praise of that or acceptance of that, will I hear what the person is really saying, which may not be acceptance of what I'm believing? Or will there already be fear and rejection or resistance arising to hearing what I'm not prepared or wanting to hear? All of us want to be confirmed in what we believe and hold dear, are attached to. We want support in that and confirmation, partnership, alliance. And when this is not coming forth, when somebody questions what I'm attached to, wonders about it, may say it is not, it may not be so, then will the openness close into a defensive posture? Find out. We're all alike in this. This is not just an idiosyncrasy of this or that person. All of us defend what we're attached to and don't hear anything contrary to that. That comes into the channel in a distorted way. The channel distorts it. The channel of expectation and wanting. You may say, you, Toni, sound as though you're propounding something, and I may sound like this because there's a lot of intensity often in what is being said. But just because things are said intensely, a lot of energy, doesn't mean I'm propounding this to be the truth, to be accepted. Is it so? This is what I'm asking. Find out. Just because I see it to be so doesn't mean it is absolutely truth. We can question it together over and over again. That's what we're doing with every talk. Hundreds of talks, questioning the same thing over and over. And as one questions, the observation may be opening up to see if something is really so. The questioner asked whether the seeing that is talked about so much here, is that the same as observing? It all depends. How is one observing? How is one seeing? If there is someone there in the middle, the feeling of someone who is critical, judgmental, expecting, withdrawing, resisting, then that observation is not the same as observing or seeing without a self-center. The words are interchangeable. One can use them interchangeably. What is important is there a self-centered vantage point from which one sees and hears and observes and feels. And we're not condemning that self-centered vantage point. We're not criticizing it. We're looking at it, trying to discover it, because it is in most of our observations, most of our listening and feeling, there is a self-centered point of view or point of hearing or point of feeling, from which comes judgment, fear, wanting, expectation, distorting the perception. And when that self-centered point of view or point of listening is absent, in abeyance, not there, then the field is open, then the seeing or listening is clear, unobstructed, undistorted. So it's not so much a matter of which is seeing the same of observing, but what is the quality of seeing or observing? And as someone mentioned in a comment I read a while ago, walking along the path, footstep by footstep, looking at the clouds and trees, hearing the birds, somewhere there is a feeling of me-ness that I am hearing, I am watching, I am walking. The trees are passing me by as I'm striding forward. And the question comes up quite naturally, doesn't it? What is this me-ness? What is this feeling of there being someone to whom all of this is happening? And who is doing the striding? Who is the listener and the observer? What makes up this deep sense of me being there doing all of that, or everything happening to me? We're not taking that for granted, that this is so, that there is someone, there is an entity, a soul inside who is at the center of everything. We don't know. We start from not knowing, not speculating, but wondering, and therefore maybe discovering what makes up this sense of me, which is the sense of separation, which ails all human beings who are caught up in that, which is our fundamental dis-ease, leading to self-alienation, alienation from each other, to conflict and war. So in questioning what makes up this feeling of self-centeredness or me-ness, we are really questioning what is at the root of all human conflict. Inwardly within oneself, with each other on a small scale, and globally. Nation against nation. Human beings against human beings. Killing each other, destroying each other, and the environment. What makes up this feeling of me? Is that a question forward? I'm not imposing it. For me, it's a tremendous question. But it's not being assigned to people to work on. If it grabs you, then it'll operate. If it doesn't grab one today, maybe it'll grab one tomorrow. Or in 10 years, who knows? Some people have been grabbed by this since childhood. What is this sense of separation that somehow or other seems not to have been there earlier? That's why all of these glorified notions of childhood, which may be wishful dreaming, but maybe there was something at some time in our life which did not feel separate, divided, in conflict. We will be coming back to this question throughout this whole retreat. And it's very welcome if people want to question it in groups or alone. Which does not mean I want to say that I'm expecting you now to bring in questions. Sometimes people feel they have to bring questions that are interesting to Toni, needing to keep her interested or entertained. If you have no question, we'll sit together without a question. Maybe one will pop up, maybe not. as to the question whether observation is inevitably self-centered and judgmental, the answer is no. It's not inevitable. There can be the openness of looking, listening, and feeling. Feeling meaning being in touch, without a reference to a self-center, meaning those thoughts which constantly refer to me as a believed in and long established through thought entity, that those thoughts are quiet, they're not operating. The energy of looking and listening has bypassed this whole thought complex with its connected emotions of how does it feel to me? What do I want to get out of it? What am I afraid of? This whole complex network, which has been built up over our whole lifetime, as well as that of our parents and foreparents, maybe already partly programmed into our genes or DNA, this whole network of me reference, me and mine, is bypassable by an energy of open awareness, of listening and looking, this moment. So just because someone is saying that, it's not good enough. It's like this old story, you can't eat a menu when you're hungry. You gotta have the food. Of course you can eat a menu. I once saw a movie somebody took in India where with their 3 kids they were feeding Kleenexes to the cows, and the cows were avidly mulching, or what do you say, up these Kleenexes, including the box. They can digest this type of cellulose. So they could also eat a menu. I don't know how nourishing it would be. But we can't eat a menu, we have to have the food. So someone saying, yes, it's possible to be aware openly, undistortedly, without the self-center rumbling around, distorting perception. It's not enough, isn't it? Each one of us needs to come upon this herself, himself. And this question comes up right away, doesn't it? How do I do it? What is your approved or recommended method to get there? And we can easily, immediately ask, where does this question come from? Give me a method to get there. I want that because that seems neat, helpful. Is the question coming out of this whole network of wanting something else? What one has or has had hasn't been satisfying for a moment or for a while, and then discontent inevitably sets in again in this network of meanness. So now is it the unself-centered observation that the mind wants to get, and therefore in its networking is asking for a method, because that's part of that web, methods, techniques. All that can be seen to happen when it happens. One person said, striving all the time to be something, to get something, to become something, and yet at a moment of awareness, no striving. And then it comes again. Why does it come again? Is it that this moment of awareness now becomes a memory that becomes a goal? I want that again, or I want to keep it. How can I sustain this? The busy work of the conditioned mind. And we are all conditioned in striving, in getting, in keeping, grabbing, holding on. And this thing here, which is no thing, does not yield to all of that conditioned technique and thinking. It doesn't yield to it. It is not attainable by any such thing. It happens on its own. When there's awareness of the ways of the mind, to want, to get, to keep, to accumulate, to get rid of, an awareness of that which is not judgmental, not putting blame on oneself or society or parents or others. Just see it without blame. Openly, yeah, this is what is happening. This is what is going on right now. The motor churning to get something, to find something, to get away from something. And the listening to that motor churning with all of its side effects affecting the whole body. Can that be listened to like the crickets, the cicadas, on a sunny, windy day? One person mentioned to me that while sitting in a relaxed way, our arms partly on the back of the sofa there in the dining room, sprawled out in a relaxed way, all of a sudden some quiet set in, which had never happened during sitting straight. And of course the sitting straight may be all involved with ideas about what sitting straight will yield one. And here for a moment relaxing and not thinking of yield or ways to get there. The mind quieted down on its own. One knew not how or why. Which doesn't mean now to everybody pilgrimage to the sofa. See, then it becomes a method again. And then one is waiting for this moment of quietness to set in. The mind is expectant. But you can see that, hear it, feel it, be in touch with that movement, because every thought and feeling and listening and striving movement is also a physically represented, physically manifesting thing in the body. It's not just thought. The body is one with thought. It's accompanying every nuance of thought and memory and striving and wanting and fearing. The body is the subtle and intricate orchestra of thoughts and memories. And out of bodily feelings arise new thoughts and memories, or old thoughts, let's say it this way. So to listen to the whole thing, the thoughts, the memories. Often people contest this and maybe sort of argue with me. You always seem to say everything is thought and memory, but there are things and feelings that have nothing to do with thought and memory. We don't need to argue about it. Let's look at it and find out more about it. And I'm not saying, I want to say this from the outset, don't feel things. Sometimes people hear it this way. And one shouldn't be feeling things, one should only watch the thoughts. Thoughts, feelings, sensations, emotions is one inseparable network of being. You can't be openly attentive and not feel feelings, a churning stomach or fear or pleasure. No matter what set it in motion, a verbal memory or a non-verbal memory. Memory is involved in setting this body in motion, though. And just because we're not aware of it doesn't mean it isn't there. There are lots of things we're not aware of. Particularly the way we live, thinking, talking, listening to radio, TV, music, this traffic noise, the news, all of this. How can we hear and be in touch with what else is going on other than what comes at us and what is produced by our constant thinking and talking loudly and quietly? So, can we withhold any opinions or conclusions about what causes anger or fear or sadness, and just watch it quietly, subtly, without already having concluded, a foregone conclusion. Because then, as we said earlier in the talk, then you can listen openly, innocently. If you already have a conclusion, well, this doesn't all come from thought, this comes from, I don't know where from. Have no theories, just observe yourself. In observing oneself, one is observing a representative human being, representative of all human beings who have lived and are living right now. Because the network between remembered experiences, the images formed and stored, the words stored, sentences, storyline, the connection between that and how we perceive now, how we emote at present, a relationship to memory that is universally true for all human beings, because we all have the same brain. We don't each have different brains or different organisms. Different in the way that not two are completely alike. And that again we all share. That not two of our organisms are completely alike. Not all of our memories are completely storing the same stuff. But they're all storing. And the storage is connected with how the organism functions. The immune system, the heart, all the chemical transmission from thought to organ and muscles. That's universally true for all human beings, whether they're living in the jungle, rainforest, or here on the hill. So in finding out about ourselves, we are finding out about humankind. That is why this work is so utterly significant. That here and there and over there and there, a few human beings are beginning to question and find out about themselves, and not just automatically roll with the habits, which leads to conflict, destruction, war, occasionally interspersed pleasures. If we are not aware what we're doing, how a thought causes a hurt, how the hurt causes the thought of getting back at the person. Or maybe it is faster than thinking, but it's still programmed thought. Thinking is what's going on right now in the present, and it takes time. But the programs that are laid down through past thinking and past experiencing function much faster. Like a quick computer brings up the thing very quickly. Doesn't take much time. So, just because something happens very fast, needing to lash back at somebody, doesn't mean that this is natural or that there's no thought involved. One has to watch and wonder about it. Why does it happen so quickly? What is going on? Is it inevitably that one is caught in this quick reaction? Hurt and hurting. Somebody just recently told me, someone hurt me, and immediately I wanted to hurt back. Couldn't believe it. In between there was some attention, hearing the leaves rustle, and then wanting to hurt back. The depth of it, the immensity of these deep-seated programs. Can one appreciate that? Appreciate not in terms of valuing it, but see how deep all of this lies, and wondering whether it can at all be dislodged. Our quick reactions according to old programs. A reaction for or against. One person said, we read that too, I realized that freedom is when something is seen, there is awareness of an old habit, and I don't have to go with it. Now the way it was put was that I have a choice of doing this or that instead. Well, maybe sometime take a talk or more time than we have now to look at what this choice is. But we'll stay with the first part of the comment. There is freedom when there is awareness of an old habit, and therefore the realization I don't have to go with it. And that doesn't take time. Seeing a habit, really seeing it, it does not have to continue at that moment. There's freedom from it. Maybe the next moment, if the attention is gone, the habit will run. Maybe it won't, because the attention is there. And attention here also meaning understanding in depth that this habit goes nowhere except automatically repeating and enclosing and dividing and separating. Can see that at a glance because one has seen it before. We've all been through it 10,000 or 10 million times. And even if it's only partially observed, this moment, a flickering of partial attention, there's learning going on about habits and reactions. And maybe a beginning of humility about ourselves and each other, caught up deeply in old, tough programs, deep-seated, and reacting from that all the time or most of the time. And I hope my way of putting it, the inflection of the voice, is not implying blame in this. Because it's much easier to look at ourselves and each other if it can happen without this old program of blame. Having been blamed so much in our life, we don't want any more of it. We cringe, we chafe under blame, and yet we're doing it ourselves to ourselves and to each other. So can we begin to look alone and together at each other and ourselves? It always goes together. Looking at you, I need to look at myself. Looking at myself, I'm looking at you. Can that happen without blame or fear of blame? Realizing that blame is inappropriate, no help, distorting, enclosing. One shuts down because one doesn't want to be blamed. And for doing this work, we need to be open and vulnerable. If blame comes this way, someone blames us, can one listen to it and see all it does? And all the reactions that want to come up or have already come up? And the mess that this creates? Mess meaning clarity of looking and conversing or discussing is gone. I feel guilty, and therefore I have to make you feel guilty too. All these old programs already put down in a holy scripture which says, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. So ancient. And yet we're free to question the whole thing and look at it without blame because it's totally inappropriate. We don't blame the trees for rustling when there's wind, do we? It just happens. When there's wind, the trees creak and rustle. When the wind quiets down, so do the trees and leaves and grasses. And the pond becomes very clear on the surface. Right now there are waves and sound. That is so, isn't it? Inwardly, are there waves and sounds, or quiet? Whatever is. Can it be seen like that? Felt like that? Listened to like that? We will end here for today.